Hi, this is Craig, and welcome to another episode of Cruising Off Duty in the Mavic tutorial series, or in this case, it's not just for Mavics, it's the DJI Go 4 app, which is used by all the more advanced DJI drones, such as the Mavic Pro, the Phantom 4 Pro, and the Aspires. So these ones have sensors that the older versions like the Phantom 3 didn't have. So this new app was made so that you could get into the settings and change the settings for the sensors and other things. So it's got more features than the basic DJI Go app that I did a episode on prior. So you can see my neighbor's walking around in his backyard. That wasn't anticipated, but let's go through this. So at the top left, I'm going to go from top to bottom so I don't miss anything. On the top left, you got the DJI logo. If you click on that, it brings you out to the menu where you can pick what type of drone you're flying, and you can go to your flight tutorial stuff. And it's something that's there, but I don't know if you'd ever want to push it while you're actually flying, because it would probably pop you right out of the screen. Going across, it's your mode that you're in. Since I have enough satellites, even though I'm inside my house, I'm near my glass doors, so I have enough satellites coming through the glass that I actually have 11. So I'm in GPS mode. If I didn't have enough satellites, like if I was flying inside my house, I'd be in Opti mode or one of the other modes because I don't have enough satellites, but I do. So I've got the green. So that's the setting or the status that the drone is in right now. The next one over to the right is how many satellites your Mavic, in my case a Mavic or whatever your drone is, has. I presently am going between 9 and 11 satellites, so it's keeping me in the green. The next thing is your sensors, whether your sensors are on or not, and that's a quick way to pop you into the sensors thing that we'll talk about in a second. But my sensors are on and working. If it's not working, you'll get a red there. If for some reason your sensors aren't working well. Next is your controller, and these number of bars here shows you how many bars your drone is getting from your RC controller. And I'm getting full bars. Obviously, I'm within my house, so it's close enough that I'm getting full bars. As you saw from my episode, I think 24, where I did the Mavic flight distance test, it was probably my highest viewed video ever at like 80,000 views or something. In that one, I was flying over the Ottawa River as far out as I could go, and I got about 15,000 feet away, and I still had full video feed from my RC. So I had full bars here and pretty much full bars here. So this is how many bars your RC is getting to your drone. This is the feed. So your HD feed means I'm getting full HD feed of video from my drone to my controller. As you get further and further away, both your controller bars might start to drop and your feed might start to drop. In my case, on that day, I was flying over just water with nothing obstructing my signal. So it ended up being I had great feed the whole time, even though I was really far away from my controller. It was more of a test, a one-time test, just to see how far I could go. Coming after that is your battery of not only your, this battery percent is your actual drone battery. So I'm at 90% drone. And if I bring this over here on your controller right here, I don't know if it's going to focus. I have 94% on my controller. So here's your controller battery, and here is your Mavic, in my case, or your drone battery. Going across here is the three dots. This is I'm going to get into more detail after, but this is where you're going to hit to get into all your settings, such as your different controller settings, HD settings, the sensor settings, your drone settings. So we'll get into that a little bit later because there's a lot to talk about there. Okay, going across beneath that is directly beneath that is one big long green line. And this tells you how much time you have left to fly. This thing will slowly get shorter and shorter, and you'll see these two little dots here. The first dot is when you'll first get your first warning from your software that says you're getting low on battery, you should consider coming back. The second one is your critical low battery warning. When you get that one, if you haven't already started coming back, the software will start to fly you home because it decides you are too low to fly on your own. And obviously you haven't heeded the first warning on your battery, so it's time for them to decide you're going to fly home. That's what happened when I flew out to that bridge 15,000 feet away from me. These dots actually move up the green line, which most people aren't aware of. They think it's a static warning. But if you get further away, this dot will move further out, and so will this one, because it's smart enough to know that you are a long distance away from your controller, and it has to factor in how much battery power is it going to take for it to get back. If you watch that episode, I believe it's episode 24, I was out there, got to the bridge, super great feed, super happy with my Mavic. It was one of my first times flying. And then it told me I needed to come back, even though this little how much flight time I had left was only maybe halfway, because it had decided these dots had moved out to the middle. And when this thing got there, it decided I was so far away, it suggested I fly home. Now, I hadn't got to the critical low level. It got to the first warning. But since I was new to the Mavic, as soon as it told me I should head home because of battery, I hit the return to home and it flew straight back across the water to me. And when I got back to me, I still had an estimated 4.5 minutes of flying, and these dots had moved further over to the left. So that's interesting that Mavic, or the DJI, sorry, has made the software so smart that the further away from the controller you get, the more these little white dots that tell you when you're getting low battery will move to the right, meaning you've got to accommodate that extra flight time it's going to take to get back. So that is really cool. Should ensure that you don't just all of a sudden run out of battery when you're still, 1,000 feet away from you. So going below that is your actual camera settings. So you've got your ISO, which is sort of like how in the old days with film, the ISO stood for how sensitive is the film to light. ISO 100 is the lowest setting you can go. The lower the setting, the better usually quality of video picture you're getting. The higher the ISO for low light situations, you can bring up the ISO so the sensor's more sensitive to light. But the higher you go, let's say above 800, is probably the max the Mavic should go. Obviously, the better drones like the Aspires and the Phantom 4 Pro have better cameras. They might be able to handle a higher ISO, but with a Mavic, anything above, I'd say 800 is getting to be almost too grainy to be usable. Like if you start going 1600 or 3200, the camera will allow you to go that high, but you start to lose. There's a bit of snow or a little grain in the video. So keep that in mind. You can't just jack it up to the highest because you're flying around at night and expect it to be a perfect picture. The next thing is your shutter speed. So I'm flying usually at 30 frames per second. So I have an ND filter on this drone right now. It's an ND8 pointing out my back door here. In a perfect world, this should be 1/60 because twice your frames per second is a perfect world. In this case, because even the ND8 filter is not quite dark enough, I'm at 1/100, which is still not bad. If I take the ND filter off with all that white snow, I'd probably be shooting at 1/1200 or something like that. I just noticed the next thing over is my exposure value. I'm actually a little underexposed, so I'm going to just turn you just move your right wheel on your controller, and now, there we go. Actually, it's perfect. When I got the exposure up to 0 instead of minus 0.7, my shutter speed dropped to 1/60 instead of 1/100. So that is actually perfect setting right there. And here's another thing I shouldn't be in, and I made this mistake on the last episode. I seem to have put it in D-Cinelike, which is a very muted color scheme, and I didn't want to be there. I just want to be in none. I wanted good color. D-Cinelike makes it flat. It's meant for when you want to color correct in post in one of your editing software later. I didn't really want to do that in my last one because I was doing a tutorial, not a color correction tutorial. So I got to remember to go in there. When I later do these dots over here, I'll change it, the color out of D-Cinelike into none. White balanced is set to cloudy, as you can see right there. And that's fine. It is a cloudy day. If it had been a sunny day, I can go in the settings of the camera and change that to sunny, or I can set it to custom and just actually manually pick my color temperature, which a lot of people have decided that's the best way to go. There is what I'm shooting at. I'm shooting at 4K. I'm not recording right now, but if I was recording, I'd be shooting in 4K at 30 frames per second. And my SD card, this little number here, tells you how much time left you have on your SD card based on that level of camera. Now, if I drop it to 1080 or something lower, or 2.7K, I'd get more than 2 hours of capacity. But in this case, I got 2 hours. So the next thing is this just shows you that you have autofocus set. So that symbol tells you that's what this is. And if I tap on the screen and I move it around, the camera will then focus on different things. You can tap to focus on wherever you want on the screen, or you can hit C1 in my case. I've set C1 to be center focus. So if I'm flying around and I just want the center of my frame to be in focus, I just hit C1. So going down onto the left here, you've got two symbols. You've got a takeoff symbol. Right now, obviously, I'm on the ground in my house, so I don't want to take off in my kitchen. That would be very bad. And if you take off, then the next thing you've got is this thing will change from a takeoff symbol to a landing symbol. So you can auto take off, which means the drone takes off about 4 feet off the ground and hovers until you tell it what you want to do next. And I suggest, like you've seen in my previous videos, just let it hover there for 5 seconds so it can take a lot of photos of the ground. The bottom facing sensors and cameras take pictures of the ground so it can remember exactly where you took off. And as you've seen from my episodes prior, that thing is rock solid in that case. It'll land within a couple inches of where you took off. As long as you hover there for, let's say, 5 seconds, about 4 feet off the ground, it does an amazing job of flying right back to where you took off. Once you take off, this lights up. Right now it's not lit up because I'm not flying, but that's the return to home button that you can hit on the screen, or obviously this button right up here on the top left is the return to home button on your actual controller. So you can do either one of those. So going across here, this is where you change between your video and your camera. So right now it's in video. I do almost all my stuff in video. I don't take too many still photos from my drone, but that's possible. Next thing here, if you're in video, this is your record button. And you'll know you're in video or camera because sometimes this is a little, people aren't sure. It shows a camera symbol and a video symbol with the arrows around it. If you're in video mode, this button is red. And if you're in camera mode, the take a picture button is white or gray. So that'll remind you, if you look down and see a white button, you know you're actually in camera mode, not in video mode. So that's important. Next thing here is this is where you go into your camera settings. So as you can see, my ISO was set, I'm in manual, my ISO is set to 100, which is the lowest. And my shutter speed is set, well, it's auto set to 60 right now, just telling me what it's at. So the next thing over is your video. This is where you pick, I picked 4K, 30 frames per second. If I wanted to change it, I just go in here and change it. Now I'm not in Cinema 4K, that's one setting higher. I'm in regular TV 4K, if you want to say. So if I'm in TV 4K, I have a choice of 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. If I go to the true Cinema 4K, I don't have the 30 frames per second option. I only have 24 frames per second. So I generally just go with this one. This is a better shape for the big, you know, most people are watching stuff on their LED TVs at home or whatever, they're not watching it in a movie theater. So I just go with that level. There's obviously, some people say the best for making the file size not huge, but still having really good quality is 2.7K. Then you have regular 1080p. When you get into 1080p, you've got a lot more choices now. Instead of just 24 or 30, you now have 48, 60, 96 frames per second. So that gives you a lot of choice. If you want slow-mo, if you want to fly and show, I don't know what, a galloping horse galloping along the beach, you want to set it in one of these higher frame rates and then play it at 30 frames per second, and then the horse will be running in slow motion. It'd be a cool look. So you can do that if you're in 1080, but you cannot do that if you're in 4K. So those are your camera settings there. You just go back. And then this is, okay, so going through there, your format, I always go MP4 just because that's sort of standard. And I've heard that the quality is just as good as MOV. The only difference is that MOV, if you're using an Apple laptop to do your editing and you're using Final Cut Pro, MOV is actually Apple's designed extension, and MP4 is kind of like universal. So some people have said you can edit a little quicker if you're using an Apple product, if you're an MOV. The downside to that MOV is that it's a slightly bigger file and the quality isn't any better from what people have told me. Now NTC PAL is really just whether you're in the United States and Canada uses NTSC, and Europe uses PAL. But you don't, I don't want to change that. Because then it changes my hertz and my frame rates are option. They don't get the same frame rates. So white balance, I set it to cloudy because lately it seems like, as you've watched my episodes, it seems like every day is cloudy lately. It's been warm, really warm for this time of year, but it's been overcast, which kind of sucks for footage. But this is something I'm going to start doing is you can set your custom color temperature to make it look whatever way you want. And the good thing about that is, let's say that looks good right there. Once you like the color, and you lock it there in custom, it stays there. So then you don't get the drone automatically, or the camera in this case, automatically brightening the image and darkening the image as it decides. You're pointing at snow, it darkens the image. You're pointing at some green trees, which are darker, it lightens the image. It's all over the map when you have it in pure auto. So some people have decided you can always do stuff in post and brighten things up and lower things, but it's hard to do that if your whole footage keeps going up and down in brightness. So you can pick a custom temperature, color temperature they call it, and then stick with the whole video being in that temperature. And then if you decide later when you look at the footage it's too dark or it's too light, you can change it in post without worrying that, you know, the first 30 seconds is too dark and the next 30 seconds is too light. So anyways, that's an option. I haven't been doing that. Lately I've just been going with, well, if it's a cloudy day, I pick cloudy. So that's that. So style, this is where you can change your sharpness, your contrast, and things like that. I generally stick to standard. I know the people that like to do color grading like to do like this D-Cinelike or whatever, and they like to turn the sharpness down and the contrast down and all these things down, and then in post add contrast and add all these other things back in. I tried doing that by the last episode when I accidentally shot in D-Cinelike and then had to color grade everything, and it was just a nightmare to edit like that. So I don't plan to do that unless I'm trying to make some very cinematic movie style episode. So like I say, if you have a setting that you want to keep all the time, you can just set it in custom and it'll remember it, and then you keep going back to that. If you're into color grading afterwards, that's where you'd want to go. Here's where I need to change this out, because I don't know why I ever got myself into D-Cinelike. I want it into none. Oh, look how much more colorful it is. Beautiful. See, D-Cinelike is light, and then even more muted, I guess is the word, and even more muted is D-Log. Look at that. I mean, it looks like I'm in a fog. There's no color at all, barely. So I'm going to go back to true color is good and none is good. None seems to be the most colorful right out of the camera, and that's what I wanted. That last episode, I apologize to you people who said my color looked weird. I mean, everything looked kind of browner than it should be. It's because I shot in D-Cinelike and then I threw a LUT, a lookup table on it that was designed for a Canon camera. It wasn't really designed for the Mavic camera, and it got the colors all wrong. So now I'm in none, so I'm in the standard color scheme, and that's what I want. So that's that. So this is other things that you can have on your screen, like a histogram. That's a lot of people like that. This little thing here shows you if you're overexposed or underexposed in any area. Now, obviously, since I can see my exposure value here is 0, I'm perfect. So nothing's overexposed or underexposed. And from left to right on a histogram, these are the darks, whether the darks are too dark or too light. And as you go across from left to right, these are the darks all the way over to these are the whites. Pretty much how it goes. If something's off the chart at the top, then you're overexposed. If you're off the chart over here on the left, your darks are too dark, they're underexposed. And if you're over here on the right and these are too high, and that's probably the snow it's looking at, these are borderline getting up there where the whites are almost overexposed, but that's to be expected. I mean, it's snow after all. The only thing overexposure warning that I would think it can be helpful is this overexposure warning. If it's overexposed, had this histogram showed the spike going right off the end of the chart, let's say the snow was overexposed, you get the zebra effect. I'll turn up the exposure and see if I get it. No, I don't. Okay, so if you go overexposed, you'll actually get little lines that show up on the thing that's overexposed. And it just reminds you when you're looking at your screen that part of your image is blown out. It's too white. So that's a good thing to have. Some of these other things, front LEDs turned off. I leave that on. What that means is when you hit record, if I hit this record button, right now my drone's got red lights flashing on the front. Hit that, and when that's turned on, means when you hit record, those red lights stop flashing. And that would be if you're shooting at night or in really like at dusk and it's really dark, you'll notice the red light flashing in the corners of the screen. So you can turn that to on, which means it's counterintuitive, but if you turn that on, it means it won't turn on the LEDs when you're recording. So that's pretty much everything in here. So we can get out of that. So this little play button, okay, so I've used this for a couple of flights. So this is my Acer tablet I just started using. So it's actually recorded on my Acer tablet some videos I've done before. So they're there in case you ever want to watch them. Going along to the bottom here is a little radar. It shows you where north is. In this case, it's weird. North is actually at the bottom. I guess it just rotates around wherever north is. And you can then tell whether you're heading whatever direction based on that. And these are important things here. Actually, you can move this histogram wherever you want. It's not really in a good spot there. I'll stick it over here. So then you got your distance from your controller. So right now I'm 23 feet away from my controller in my house. The height off the ground is 0 because it's just sitting on a chair in my family room or my kitchen. So it's 0. So I'm not off the ground at all. So and this is your horizontal speed and your vertical speed. So those are the things there. Okay, let's get into the 3 dots at the top there. This is where we could have a whole episode on this, but I'm going to try and whip through this really quick. So in the top one, it looks like that's your shape of your drone. Now this is an important one because people often ask me that when I'm on my sailboat, what I'm going to do. So your home point, by default, it's set to where you take off from is your home point. But you can actually reset your home point to be whether you want to fly to a different spot and then tell it that's the new home point. You could do that. Or on a moving sailboat, if I'm drifting down the river, you can actually have the home point set to close to the controller. So as you move on your boat and you hit home, it'll fly back towards your controller. And then once you get really close, you can manually take over and actually land or hand catch it or do whatever you want to do at that point. But yeah, if you're flying or if you're moving on a sailboat, last thing you want to do is hit return to home and realize it's landing, back on the beach where you took off from 20 minutes earlier and you're now on a moving boat way far away from it. Okay, let's talk about return to home. The altitude set default when it came from the factory was 30 meters, which is about 100 feet. I bumped it up to 40 meters because I wanted to make sure I could clear any power lines or anything. 100 feet just felt like it was a little too tight for comfort. So I switched it to 40 meters, which is 130 feet around. So what that means is no matter where you are, let's say you're 80 feet off the ground and you hit return to home, it'll rise up in my case to 130 feet, then fly back to me and then land. So it gives me a little bit more breathing room and I just felt safer. So this is enable multiple flight modes, which means with this turned off, it means you'd fly in positioning mode, let's say, and you decide, oh, I want to go to sport mode. You can't. Once you've started flying in whatever mode, you wouldn't be able to switch to another mode. I've got it turned on, which means I can switch from positioning mode to sport mode while flying. Beginner mode, when you first get it, it's defaulted, it's already on. I turned it off, of course, because it just slows everything down. It implies that you really don't know how to fly your drone yet. Max altitude, this is from the factory like this. It's 120 meters, which is 400 feet, which is the maximum height you're allowed to fly in the United States. And I think most countries, Canada is actually 300 feet. We just have to be different, I guess. And so I should actually bump that down to a lower setting, but it's been just set like that. And I've never actually changed it. Distance limit, you can turn that on and tell it how much distance maximum you want. I just have never bothered to do that. And then the advanced settings are things like, well, this is what we talked about in the last video on the DJI Go regular app, which is your expo, your sensitivity, and your gain. And generally, the only one I ever changed was this one. I changed them all down to 0.2, 0.2, and 0.2, as you saw in my previous episode. And I never changed it when I went to the DJI Go 4 app. It knew what these were set at because they're loaded into your drone. So as soon as I uploaded this new app, it was still set to what I'd set it up in the last app, which is kind of neat. And all that does is just slows your drone down so it's not as jerky when you're trying to do filming. Gain never got switched. I don't believe sensitivity ever got switched. Nope. So I didn't switch anything else. I just switched the expo on that. So that's pretty simple. Sensor state. This is just sort of a check to see if everything's working. My compass, I haven't done the compass calibration, so it might be why it's showing me a yellow instead of a green. Green is excellent, yellow is good, so these are good, and red is poor. You shouldn't have anything poor. If you do and it won't go away, there's probably something wrong with your drone and you might want to send it in to be fixed, but it shows me that all my sensors are good. Next thing is your controller. Now this is just where you might be able to custom set some of the things. Stick mode, mode 2, that's the way it comes from the factory. Mode 2 just seems intuitive. It's the way most drones are set up. It's the regular mode everybody's used to, so just leave it in mode 2, because if you ever hand your controller off to someone else and it's all messed up in custom and you've got it a certain way that nobody else does it, then they will be confused. Your C1 and C2 buttons, these are important. I've got C1 set to center autofocus. I believe it's from the factory like that, but if not, change your C1 to center autofocus, which means if you find your camera is blurry, you just hit the C1 button, which is the back button on the left side of your controller, and that will then center your focus on the middle of your screen, which is usually where people are focusing their eyes, and that's that. And the auto exposure unlock, I would actually change this. There's another one here that I think is better. Camera settings. So you can then hit C2 and get into changing what, your different camera settings, what you want to shoot at. Your 5-button thing, I never used that little thing right beside your screen. There's this little tiny itty bitty joystick that you can change things. I don't really use it. To zoom in and zoom out, I've never used that. So that's, link your RC. Here's something to keep in mind. If you've ever crashed your drone and you send it in for repair or whatever, and they send you back a different one. That's happened to people where they get back one and they've actually had little markings on their drone and they got one back that they said was fixed, and it wasn't even the same drone they sent in. You'll have to link your RC or your remote control to this new drone because it wasn't by factory the same drone you started with. So there's something to keep in mind. If you ever buy a new RC, if you break your RC or if you break your drone and you get a different one, you're gonna have to relink them, and that's where you would go for that. HD, this is your feed from your drone to your controller. This is what your screen will see. For some reason, I'm set in, I was set in 720, but I should be in 1080p. That's by default. So your channel is auto. That's just leave it in auto. And this is just you showing your image transmission code. So it's how many megabytes per second you're getting from your feed. Next thing is your batteries. This just shows you not only your voltage of each battery, but your temperature in Celsius. Now, I don't know if you can set that to Fahrenheit for you Americans, but the rest of the world uses a metric system. So I guess by default, they just assume you want to see it in metric. Obviously, my drone's just sitting there not flying, so it's not really putting a lot of pressure on the batteries. So it's pretty low temperature. I've seen other videos where people are showing and their batteries are in the 40s. So that's actually not very hot. Power remaining, total capacity, times charged. It actually knows how many times I've charged these batteries, which is kind of surprising. Critical battery warning. Now I switched this, I think it was defaulted to 10 and 30. So your first indication of your low battery was set by the factory at 30%, which is a little early for me. I mean, 30% is a lot of flight time. And then once you hit that low battery thing, it just keeps telling you on your screen that your battery is low. It's just annoying. I think it even beeps. So that can be a pain in the butt to have to live with. So I turned it down to 20%. Once it gets to 20, it starts warning you your battery's low. And at that point, I'm sufficiently concerned that my battery is getting down there. And so I don't mind flying back right away as soon as I see that. At 10%, you're at your critical low warning. And as I told you before, if you don't landed at that point, Mavic will just take over, or whatever drone you have from DJI will just take over, and it will try to return home and land whether you want to or not. Your flight time is just telling you how much time you've flown, and your advanced setting, do you want to show your voltage on the main screen? Well, the main screen's busy enough as it is, so I don't put that on. And time to discharge, just 10 days just means if I leave my battery fully charged just sitting on my desk, it'll take about 10 days for the battery to discharge itself. And the next thing is your camera settings. So this is important. There's two ways that your gimbal can work. It's FPV mode or follow mode. By default, it's set to follow mode, which is what we all want, where the gimbal compensates for the roll of the drone and keeps everything level. FPV mode means as your drone turns to the right or turns to the left, your camera will actually bank with it, as if you're a fighter pilot in a plane or something and you're wearing those FPV goggles. When you veer to the left, you want to feel like you're veering to the left on these goggles, and that's fine if you're flying FPV and you're, I don't know, drone racing or something. But if you want a video, the last thing you want is every time you turn your drone, the camera leans to the left or leans to the right, because that will really kind of mess up the viewer watching your cinematic drone footage. Gimbal recenter. These are more things that if you've got a screwed up gimbal, you can auto calibrate it again. If you felt like it calibrated weird when you started up your drone, you can auto calibrate it again. Gimbal roll adjust. So let's just say, for argument's sake, you have had a hard landing. Maybe you've actually bent the housing for your gimbal and it just seems to be a wee bit off. Actually, it does look like it's already off. That is weird. I don't know how that got set like that. Somehow or other, I don't know. Oh, I'm probably on an unlevel surface when I started this up because I'm on a chair. Yeah, that's definitely crooked. So if you start on an unlevel surface, when it calibrates at first, it will compensate for the unlevel surface. So it was at 1.3, I think. But you can actually adjust this while flying. If you're flying and you notice the horizon is just a wee bit canted, you can actually just go into the setting and manually tell it to compensate for the gimbal. So it was 1.3 because when I started this Mavic up, I was on a chair in my kitchen and the chair is probably not level. So that's that. And that's pretty much it. Gimbal recenter, I'm not 100% sure why you would use that. Again, I think these are things that if your gimbal's messed up and you know it's messed up, you can get in there and kind of manually change things. Last thing is these three dots at the very bottom. These are just changing things that in the automatic, like in the overall settings. Do you want it to be imperial in your units, metric, or metric meters per second? Imperial, because everybody seems to talk about feet, how many feet can you go in the air and how many this and that. I've set it to imperial, but as you saw when it talked about the battery temperature, it was actually in metric. So I guess some things, no matter whether you say imperial or not, it will switch to metric anyway. Enable manual focus. You can actually have the camera be completely manual focus, but I think that would be a pain to constantly be flying around tapping on everything every time you want to change your focus. So of course I've left that off. Long press. This is if you press the button long enough, it'll do something different. I don't have that. I don't really use that. Calibrate map coordinates. This is only if you're in China for mainland. For some reason, the map coordinates in China, I guess maybe they're super secret about their maps. But if you want to calibrate your maps for China, you have to have that turned on. Not that I ever plan to fly in China, but it's turned on anyway. Show flight route. It's on, it's turned on. I don't know why you would have it off. Cache locally recorded. That was those recordings that we had on here from my previous recordings. The largest video size I've got set is 2 gigs. You can set it to higher, but 2 is fine. I don't really plan to watch it from here. I've got it recorded on the drone, so why would I need to watch it on my tablet? Auto cleanup. Video cache, I guess I might turn that on. So what ends up happening is if the cache gets too much, if there's too many videos in there, it can start auto cleaning the older ones that you haven't watched. Flight logs, if you want to, your flight logs are already recorded in there, so that's where you would get at them. Your device name, you can change that. This is important. Your geosystem thing. I had this once when I put my sailboat at Iroquois, and I went to take off to fly around my boat. I'm unaware that there's this little, probably farmer's field airstrip just down the street, which I didn't even know was there. And it told me I couldn't take off there because I was too close to an airport. And I believe me, this was in the middle of nowhere. So there was no way this was a big airport. It must have been, like I said, one of these farm fields where people sometimes take off from. But it told me I couldn't. So I've got it set to on. So it just reminds me if I'm like new to an area, if I'm going to take off, it'll tell me you're too close to an airport and you can't take off. I guess if you wanted to overrule that, you could go in here and turn that off, and then it won't tell you that you're too close to an airport. I think there's one other thing, the sensors. Yeah, here, sensors, pretty much every sensor should be on except for this one, this fly backward thing. So on the Mavic doesn't have backward facing sensors. I know the Phantom 4 Pro and the new Aspire 2 have sensors all over the place, sensors at the back, at the sides. So in that case, I would turn it on, but with the Mavic not having any backward facing sensors, what this is if you have active track turned on, let's say you're following a car driving down the road, well, if the car does a U-turn and starts flying towards the drone, to keep it in frame will actually fly backwards. Or a person running at the drone, it will actually fly backward. Problem is the Mavic doesn't have any sensors at the back, so you could back yourself right into a tree. So I've got it set to off so that my drone will always try and keep people in front of it. If they run directly under the drone, it will not try and back up to keep them in frame. I don't want it to accidentally back into something. All these things should be set on. All these downward facing positioning sensors. I mean, I don't know why you'd ever want to turn off your sensors. They're there for a reason. So generally in the sensors section, just leave everything on except for maybe if you have a Mavic, turn off the backward facing flight option. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So here's what I'm going to suggest. I've gone over this super fast. I know there's a lot to cover there. Leave in the comments below if there's an area that I went over too quickly and you didn't quite understand it. I can answer your questions in the comments, or if there's a whole area I should do a video on, then I'll do a separate video on that, but it'll all be based on your comments. If we think we've covered it, then we're good, and I won't do another one on the DJI Go 4 app. And when they come out with the DJI Go 5 app, then I'll probably do one then. So until next time, Craig signing off, and safe cruising.